good evening. My name is Lloyd Sanborn. What I'm going to talk about is shipbuilding in Haverhill and Bradford. This map I have here is a map that I made up. It's not the scale, and it's probably the locations of a lot of the shipyards are probably not in the average, the location it should be. One of the reasons for that is researching this, even in Chase's book, the history of the city of Haverhill, he mentions shipyards, but he'll say they're down by the old burial grounds, but he doesn't say it's an upriver or downriver. So you're not sure of the location. So this is really a hobby with me, researching this, and it sort of got carried away over the years. But Haverhill was a perfect place to build ships. One, we had the river, we had all over here. We had all over here, we had plenty of lumber, we had plenty of manpower. So Haverhill was a perfect place to start building ships. The first ship built in Haverhill was in about 1671. It was built, yes, it was a small ship. It was built for three gentlemen, and it cost £6.09. That's what they paid for it back then. The Merrimack River flows about 117 miles from the center of New Hampshire till it empties into the Atlantic Ocean. It is now navigable about 13 miles inland. You can go no further today than you can from the bridge. The bridge just gets too shallow. In the old days, you could go further than that. You could go all the way around the bend and up until Mitchell's Falls. It was a 3-foot, actually a waterfall. It was by Kimball's Island. Kimball's Island, if you go down 110 and look at where the waste recovery plant has their big mound, that's basically where it was. This Kimball's Island, which is no longer there. But in order to get across the river, in the old days, you had to have ferry. You had to take the ferries. The ferry right here is called the Haverhill Ferry. She ran across here, right about across from Mike Sunoco. She would run right across there. The second one, or another one, was the chain ferry. She ran between Groveland, or I should say out now East Bradford, and Haverhill, right where the Groveland Bridge is today. The next one is Cotter's Ferry. This was at Millville Lake, the pond that came down. He had a ferry right here. And if you stood in Groveland today, going to there where the old Pine Speedway was, that's where his ferry ended up. The next one would be up here, Swift's Ferry, and that was up at Rocks Village. And that it went from Rocks Village over here into Newbury, because eventually this was all Newbury until it separated, West Newbury separated from Newbury itself. But these were the ferries. There was another ferry too, which was way down here. It was on the Methuen line. It was called the Gates Ferry. Many people don't know about it, and I don't know how many people ever used it. The ferry here, right here, would be destroyed. There would have a second ferry put across there because the bridge will be destroyed in the coming years. Wharfs. Wharfs first started. Ebenezer Eastman put the first wharf up in Haverhill in 1721. He put it up right about here. Oh, by the way, this red dot, you are here.
Okay.
So you can orientate yourself. But he actually put a wharf up here. Once he put one up, then everybody started putting up. Joseph Greeley put one up. Richard Hazleton put one up. They all started to put up these wharfs along with the wharfs. People said, and if we got wharfs for ships coming up and down the river, why don't we build ships? So they started to build ships. At first, the only ships that would come up and down the river were small ships like those gondolas, and they would bring it up. The disadvantage is, if you had a ship, you could only bring it upriver on the in tide and bring it out on the out tide, because the Merrimack River runs about 5 or 6 knots, and that's a pretty steep current to face. The first ship built in 1671 was the Betty Ann Princess. It was built for 3 different gentlemen. Richard Hazen was the first one to actually do a shipbuilding yard. Mr. Hazen, his yard was right here, right next to the old burial grounds, or where Mike Sunoco is today. We think that's where his yard was. They had to be on the other side of what, this was actually called River Road at one time. So they had to be on the other side, facing the river. John Atwood, he came and he had a yard here, East Bradford. His yard was down here along the Merrimack River. He was one of the first men to build, excuse me, on East Bradford. Then Henry Springer came up and he built another yard right here. He was another one of the first ones, and he was just down the street here, just a short ways down. He had a yard. His yard would later be taken over by Daniel Webster. It was John Burroughs built one. He built the only yard in Rocks Village. His family built that yard in 1730. His family would operate that yard for another 60 years till they went out of it, till they went out. Many shipyards operated, and then other trades came into effect. You bring in, once you start building ships, you bring in cabinet makers, blacksmiths. You bring in sail makers. You bring in caulkers. There was the people that would caulk the side of the ship. You bring in coopers. They were barrel makers. All these trades. In 1810, 10% of the Haverhill male residents worked in shipbuilding industry, which was really something. That was a big industry here. The sawmills, because you had to have sawmills. The first sawmill was on Little River, but once again, all the information I read is it was on Little River. Where on Little River? I have no idea. There was 2 other sawmills right up on Johnson's Pond in East Bradford. They supplied a lot of the goods. Now the builders started coming in, and they were building their ships, and they were really going good. But along with builders, people came in to make money. There were other mercantile business. Edward Flynn, he built a yard near Springer right here. Eventually, this would all be a congested area from the bridge, which is now right here, down here. This is the main place for shipyards and wharfs. There were probably half a dozen shipyards. The only other shipyard was across the river here on where the Preston Yacht Club is today. I often believe they should have, the way they talked about ship being built in Bradford, there had to be other shipyards, but there's no records. I've read the history of Bradford, no one ever mentions them. I would say if they did, the other ones would be where the old Taylor Goodwin Lumber Company was. I think that's probably where they were. But the early shipyards, there was no definite location. They would just say near this, near that, or upriver, or down, how far downriver. It was hard to say. The last shipyard in 1800s closed in Rocks Village. He closed the yard after 60 years of business. The War of 1812 slowed shipbuilding down completely. The Revolutionary War slowed it down, but not that bad. The War of 1812 slowed it really down because the British blocked.
The paperwork.
I'm losing my place here. The air conditioner came on. The War of 1812 slowed the shipbuilding in Haverhill really down because the British were blockading all the ports, and we could not trade with the Caribbean islands, which was a big part of our trade deal. After that, shipbuilding started to come back up, but not like it did after the Revolutionary War. It was a ship being towed, built in Haverhill, towed downriver, and to do report, to have its mast put on, and then a group of individuals were coming up on a scow, which is just a flat bottom boat with one sail. They were coming up the river in May of 1807. They had a storm come up, a northeaster. Of the 11 men in the boat, they capsized somewhere around Rocks Village. 6 of the men died, capsized and died. Luckily, one of the men that survived this was a man named Nathaniel Colby, who built the Elizabeth. He was one of the survivors in this. As I said, 1810 was the bunker year in Haverhill. Haverhill built, in 1810, 9 ships were built in Haverhill for a tonnage of 1,847 tons. 3 ships in Bradford for another 573 tons, and that was 2,430 tons. And that was the banner year in Haverhill for shipbuilding. Never again would we see such a year. Bigger ships were being built, but not at the same time. Carpenters were paid, or shipwrights as they were called, were paid $1 a day. That was their salary. Their work day was from sunset to sunrise. They had a break at 11 o'clock in the morning. That was their noon break. And then at 4 in the afternoon, they had another break. If you worked for a real good shipyard, at 4 o'clock, you always wanted to hear the foreman yell grog, because you get a pint of grog. You needed grog, you needed rum to build ships, and some yards did it. In the wintertime, you worked as many hours as it was of daylight, and that was it. The winter was short, and the weather could stop you. People ask me how long to build a ship. It's a hard question to answer. How big is the ship? How many people worked in the shipyard? What was the weather conditions? This was all part of that. Now, other people got into shipbuilding too, but they got into a different way. They were merchantmen in Haverhill, and they figured, oh, there's money to be made in shipbuilding. So what they would do is they would buy a part of your ship. You're building a ship. John White, I'll use him as an example. He'd say to the shipbuilder, I'll buy 20% of your ship. So he owned 20% of that ship. The ship would go, drop the cargo off, come back, whatever that ship made, he made 20% of it. Disadvantage, if that ship was out to sea, got lost, he lost 20%. John White was one. Benjamin Willis was another one. Benjamin Willis' son, his junior, James Duncan Jr., and their name Isaac Osgood and Moses Gale. John White was a pretty clever fellow. He owned a home which was right about here, where the Haverhill Ferry was. And George Washington was touring the United States at that time. He came down from New Hampshire. He was waiting to get on the ferry to cross the river. And John White went, oh, Mr. President, why don't you sit up on my porch? I'll give you a glass of wine and you can wait for the ferry to come. So Washington went up, sat on his porch, had the glass of wine. From then on, he put a sign up on his house, Washington drank wine at this house. He took a little advantage of it. He was, these men were very good men. They made a lot of money in shipping. But like I said, the War of 1812, an American ship was stopped, a brigantine called the Factor. She was stopped by the British, captured, and no one knows what happened to it. Usually when you capture a ship, you change its name and its flag, it's flying. In 1818, a giant storm hit here. The ice broke up. They said chunks of ice that were 2 and 3 feet were floating down the river. It wiped out a lot of shipyards here. It took out the bridge across the the Merrimack Bridge, it was called in Roxville. It took the bridge right out. And then after that, they had to come back and put a ferry across there. Colonel Johnson opened up the ferry back across here till they built a new bridge. Another ship, and you could see a model of this ship in the Haverhill Public Library's special collection, the Ulysses. She was a large 340-ton ship. She sailed all over the world. She returned to Salem, loaded up again after paying $15,000 of custom fees to the Salem Custom House. In September 10th, she left for a voyage to France, never heard of again. A lot of ships would do that. They were just never heard from again. The sea took them. Who knows what happened. Captain William Caldwell, who was another businessman in Haverhill, also a shipbuilder, he built a ship, a 400-ton ship called the North Bend. This was probably the largest ship ever built in Haverhill. Mr. Caldwell built it. He was a businessman. The Haverhill Gazette reported a ship of 400-ton burden belonging to David Pingree of Salem was launched by Captain Cadwell Shipyard in the village this Sunday. But they covered it and they thought it was amazing that it did. Now, I mentioned John Atwood. He started his yard right here. And also in East Bradford, there were other people down there too. There were the Stevens, the Peckers, the Lampins, the Atwoods. There was King Lampin and his son Parker, and a man named Gringo. The shipyard right here belonged to the Stevens. Where that was, I was told once that a fellow told me his great-great-grandfather told him that this shipyard was right behind SD Lumber, where SD Lumber is now. But again, we can't know if that was an exact thing. They had so many ships being built at one time in Groveland. You couldn't go down the street because the bowsprit, which is the front of the ship, were hanging over the streets. Ships had trouble getting up and down the street. But these were all these. He had this one, and they would take the complete, they probably came much further down here than this, I'm not sure. And then in 1828, Captain William Hazelton built a 70-ton steamer called the Merrimack. She was a stern wheeler. She would be the first steamship to run up and down the Merrimack River. This actually was the beginning of the end for the shipbuilding, because the steamers didn't have to worry about was the tide coming in, was the tide going out. They ran it. He built the ship called the Merrimack, and for 25 cents, you could get here at Chase's Wharf, take a trip all the way down to Newburyport. They would let you off. You could get back on the ship and come all the way up. Something like Red Slavitt used to do, except this was done by him. A few other ships did that too in the later years. In 1795, the Merrimack Bridge, or the Rocks Bridge, was built. This was, it went from, like I said, Rocks Village over here to Newbury. But in 1818, it was destroyed. The big storm took it right out. Then a new bridge, Colonel Johnson took over the ferry. He ran that for about 8 or 9 years. Then a new bridge was built. The new bridge was an unusual bridge because it had a draw. In 1883, the Boston Bridge Company, and I know Jay Leary knows all about this, they redid the bridge, and what it has a swing gate in it. It does not draw, it swings. This is still the only swing bridge operating in the state of Mass at this time. And I know they still go down there and turn it, and hopefully it will open. Or if a truck doesn't hit it first, either or. The other bridges were put in. The Havel Bridge, which is down here, was put in 1794. Later, it was replaced many years later in 1793, and then again in 1925, which is the bridge we now have there, and it will soon be changed again. The bridge connecting Havel to Bradford was really good because then everything flowed across. You didn't have to worry about, as you see on this, I talked of the map that it was one I made up. If you notice, I have Clements Island here, which is now Hales Island, because this was just a map I made up. These lakes were all connected at one time into Plugs Pond, and they all ran down. This was quite a big stream that came down here into the river. Now it's all covered over. And then in 1872, the Groveland Bridge was put in. This bridge right here, they did away with the chain ferry. So that was the last of the ferries across the river. They didn't need them anymore. They had bridges. The Boston and Maine came in. The Boston and Maine put a bridge right across the river here. It was quite the bridge. It didn't open, which was a problem because ships who were built upriver could not use it. It couldn't get under that bridge. The bridge coming in also did shipbuilding in Havel Inn because trains could take goods to Boston, Newburyport, and wherever quicker than you can by ship, and that was another problem. In 1874, a man named John Tilton was building 2 ships. In fact, we have his great-granddaughter in the audience. standing back there. He was a shoe manufacturer, and he wanted to revive shipbuilding in Haverhill. So he built 2 ships. His first one was called the 182-ton Lucy May. It was named after his youngest daughter. He built the ship, and then he had to take it down the river to have the mast put up in a guy named Mansard's yard in Newburyport. The problem is, the bridge was here, so he sued the Boston and Maine River. He used some law that no one ever heard of. The river comes first, which was a law. And so the Boston and Maine, rather than get into a contest with him and go into court and all this, they told Tilden, we'll compensate you. We'll pay to have that ship brought down. And he said, okay, that's fine. And what does he do? He builds another ship. He builds a second ship called the Lucy May. And same deal, the Lucy May was built, he built Ezra Ann, which was named after his wife. He said to the Boston man, you owe me money. You got to get my ship down here. The second ship was later sold to a New York organization. But he was a pretty clever fella, and the B&M didn't want to get in a contest with him. They probably could have won, but there was an old ordinance that said the river comes first. I don't know what the actual name was. In 1880, a young lady from Bradford, Nellie Perry, would christen the ship called, a stern wheeler called the City of Haverhill. She was built down in Newburyport, and she would take you for 50 cents. You could come here, go all the way down, take it to the Isles of Shows. And yeah, that was quite the trip. They would do that twice a month. There were special trips. It cost you more money to get down there. It only operated, for a few years. And then in 1895, while being towed to Florida, she got caught in a storm. And she got wrecked right off the coast of New Jersey. At the end of the 19th century, new sounds appeared to Haverhill. That was the sound of the sewing machine. The sewing machine came in, several people got together and decided, the small shoe shop owners, let's put the shoe shops in one big building. So they all moved into one big building, and that they were offering jobs to Haverhill citizens, better pay, better working conditions, year-round business, year-round work, everything to do that the ship people couldn't do them. And so that really hurt Haverhill. But in 1886, another ship was built. It really wasn't a ship, it was a barge. It was built right in Washington Square, which would be right about here. It was an 88-foot barge. It was to carry coal up and down the river. It would be powered by a steam tug. And a man named Nathaniel Jackson built that. Even as shipbuilding ended, Haverhill still continued to send a lot of lumber from her lumber yards down to Newburyport, Salisbury, that was still building ships. That was still a very good business for the ship owners and for the ship people in Haverhill. And then 1850, East Bradford became Groveland. They lost they lost half of their land in Bradford to it. They also lost 40% of their population when that move was changed. So now that's why we have Groveland and West Newbury. What happened and why this was changed from Newbury, because Newbury split up. Once Newbury actually ran from the ocean all the way to East Haverhill. And what they did, they split the town in thirds. You have Newbury, Newburyport, and West Newbury, and that's how they split the town up. What happened is that once they did this, in Haverhill took over Bradford. It remains the only city other than Boston in the Commonwealth to annex the neighbor city or town. Now only small shops will produce ships. 1929, a fella had a small shop right at the foot of Green Street. He produced just small sailboats. That the business was going. Gone are the days of sailors on the port thinking, geez, I'd like to be on one of these ships to take me to Fiji, Hawaiian Islands, Alaska. They would just love to go there. Also, they missed the chance of being on the mast of a whaling ship and seeing their first whale and yelling, "There she blows." Those days were all gone. Never again would the people in Haverhill see these mighty ships that carried our product all over the world slide down into the waves of Haverhill. So with that, I thank you. If you have a question, I'll try and answer it. Yes?
Vivid images of the ships that you were talking about, like this one over here, would you consider that a larger ship, a smaller ship?
Well, this is called a sloop. This is what you use in the Merrimack River mostly. How many sloops were built in Haverhill? Probably a lot of them. Visualize, these ships could sail up and down the river. If you had a sloop and you sailed to Newburyport and you went out to the ocean, you had to register your ship. If you registered a ship, you had to insure it. These men didn't want to insure these ships. So what they did, they left them on the river. And all they would do, they'd carry goods from Newburyport to Haverhill, Haverhill and Newburyport. Visualize a sloop as a UPS truck. She would go to Newburyport, load up with her goods, sail up the river on the inside, drop the goods off, take the finished goods, sail them back down on the outside.
So the larger ships that were being made would be sold to the bigger ports like Salem and Newburyport?
Yes.
They would never come back?
No, most of them would not come back. In fact, a lot of them would be going to Salem, and somebody would say to it, "Gee, I love your ship. Can I buy it?" And they'd say, "Sure," we'd say the ship. And a lot of people did that, and they made a lot of money, because these people were just in the business for making money. A fellow in Goodrow, who owned a shipyard here in Groveland, he built 5 ships. He took one of his ships and he loaded it with goods, loaded a crew on it, and sailed off to Baltimore. When he got to Baltimore, he sold the goods, sold the ship, dismissed the crew, and he took the train back to Haverhill. And he made a lot of money. But they would do that. They would just sell the ship right off. They didn't want them. I mean, once they were gone, that was it. But these were, yes. But Haverhill also built 3-masted ships too.
Yeah.
The North Bend was a huge ship. They were 400 ton. So this was probably only about 30 tons.
And I'd like to point out that Lloyd built that replica.
Yes, sir.
The steamers that went up and down the Merrimack, were they coal powered?
Yes. Yes, they brought coal because when Newburyport's shipbuilding days were over, they brought in a railroad and they had coal yards down there. And they would take the ships and bring them up here. Yes, they were, some might have been wood, but coal was the easiest to get.
And the coal yards were in Newburyport?
Yeah, they were huge coal yards. And if you look at Newburyport today, out with their parking lot out by the river, that was all coal yards out there at one time. And they would bring them, some of you people may remember, the old electric company in Haverhill used to big mounds of coal, and they would have it brought up the river.
Interesting.
Yes.
How did Haverhill compare to the other towns along the river as far as shipbuilding? I mean, did we do more than other towns, or you said 1815 was about the heyday?
We probably did as good as the city of size of Haverhill could do. We couldn't compete with Newburyport. That was a given thing. They're just too many shipyards. But we did very well in Haverhill.
So as far as the Merrimack River goes, it would be about the second or the third?
Haverhill probably ran second in Haverhill. There were some shipyards in Salisbury, some in Amesbury, but Haverhill ran second to Newburyport. Yes.
Are there any remains of the wharfs in the river? Or have you seen it?
Remains of I don't believe there is any more remains of the wharfs in the river. They probably all washed out by now. There is a wreckage of a ship in the river. It's somewhere right about here. And that ship was never built in Haverhill. It was called, it belonged to the Sea Scouts of Haverhill, and then it broke loose in the flood of 36 and beached itself there. It was called the LV-19. It was a light vehicle 19. It was owned by the Sea Scouts in Haverhill. But no, I don't know of any other docks that lived past this. There were some remains, and when they redid the Groveland Bridge, I went underneath where the old bridge was, and I did see remnants of, I think, probably the chain ferry where it docked, but no docks. So, very good. Yes.
When the shipbuilding industry kind of wanes,
Yeah.
do those families that were building these ships, did they leave the area or did they get into another?
No, they
industry?
just got into another they just got into another business.
Yeah.
They probably went into the shoe shop business, or they went into other businesses that came around. No, they would actually stay here.
So
A lot of these
those-
families.
Many of those families still here?
Yeah, they are. A lot of the families that probably went back to that time are still here. Don't quote me on that, but a few are.
Yeah.
All right, so I thank you very much.